Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. I'm Dr. Fanny Lacote, and 2 weeks after Halloween, and with Christmas getting closer and closer with its ghost stories tradition, I'd like to talk to you tonight about novels, French and Gothic novels. So my talk is called Unveiling the Secrets and Mysteries of French Novels. Here in Oxford, I'm working on the literary production that covers a turbulent period in French history, from the French Revolution to the restoration of the monarchy. This period of literary history is very much a secret and mysterious one. It spans over decades of the late 18th and early 19th century. As a consequence, it's hard to classify and to date properly. Does it belong to the literature of the 18th century, to that of the 19th century, or neither? These works are rarely reprinted in modern editions. They're usually excluded from modern textbook and literary histories, and they're seldom looked at in academic studies. In this case, this period of literary history would deserve rehabilitation because it bears witness of the trends and changes happening within the literary markets. Its industrialization, with its new publishing practices, its new actors, its growing readership, and its critical reception. It's part of our roles as scholars in the humanities to rediscover deserving, forsaken texts, and that's one of the aims of the project I'm working on. So a little bit more about the project. It's called CAT19, CAT for catalogue, 19 for 19th century. And it's a panorama of French language novel for the early 19th century. So once finished, because it's very much a work in progress still, so when it's finished, it will be an online database available worldwide. And this database will enable to do keyword searches and to produce a statistic to get to know better this unknown, mysterious literary production. In 1804, an anonymous writer, a French writer, comments, "Nowadays everybody reads, from the little mistress in her boudoir to the apple seller in her stall, and what does one read? Novels." They noticed the increase in publications, as well as the increasing literary rates, and the growing readership within all social classes. As reader demanded more fiction, Gothic novel became a major trend in the late 18th and early 19th century. French editors and journalists alike complained against the invasion of spooky novels coming from across the channel. Critics qualified, these novels usually stage, so for those of you who are not familiar with the notion of Gothic and Gothic novels, they are fiction which usually stage despotic and corrupted villains pursuing young innocent women in gloomy old castles or monasteries or convents, and those were usually haunted by ghosts and other supernatural creatures. Critics qualified these novels as monstrous productions emanating from English brains and flooding the French literary market. They worried about the state of the national literary production, since French authors seemed to either translate or imitate the English style, but not to create anything new or anything French anymore. They also worried about the corruptive effects of novel reading, which, according to them, instills in readers wrong ideas of love and life and damages their morale, not to mention waste their time. These concerns would translate into contemporary lamentations about, for example, the dangers of watching certain types of television or those of playing video games. The dialogue between history and fiction is undeniable. And it is said that Gothic fiction in particular not only responds to certain trends, and especially to what sells, but most importantly, it reacts to social fears and anxieties. After the traumatic events of the French Revolution, at a time of political unrest, during which several forms of government succeeded one another, Gothic fiction provided a means to exorcise ghosts of the past and addresses anxiety regarding an uncertain future. As a genre driven by mysteries and secrets, the Gothic is populated with veils and cassocks concealing true identities. It's also true for the cloak of fiction and that of translation and that of edition as well. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Gothic constitutes a mode of choice for men, but also and especially for women, who were excluded from the political and public sphere, and for which the only way to convey their opinions was to do so under the disguise of fiction. So what are the strategies used by authors, translators, and publishers to emphasize secrets and mysteries in order to appeal to the readership? Well, titles are one of them. A search in Cat 19 shows that titles containing the word secrets and mysteries tend to increase during a more stable period after a change of government, and sometimes also after a war. It suggests that Gothic fiction is a reassuring type of reading, the product of a certain distance with turmoil, or of a sense of security, if you want. But mostly, Cat 19, research with Cat 19 shows that most novels were actually original French creations. So critics therefore didn't need to worry too much about the stagnant state of the national literary productions. Now let's move on to another strategy, illustrations. Illustration play a similar role as title in the sense that they were used for advertising purposes. Illustration facing a book title page, so usually on the left of the title page, are called frontispieces, and they are more present in the French novels than in the English one. And I'll give you a few numbers just now. So only 8% of English Gothic novels are illustrated, while 52% of the translation from the English are illustrated, and 63% of the French Gothic novels also contain illustrations. The French illustration, as we've seen here, usually depict the most violent, shocking, or suspenseful and mysterious scenes in order to appeal to the reader and to confirm also the genre of the type of novel that the reader is holding in their hands. Another strategy, so British and French publishers sometimes choose to visually emphasize elements of horror, mystery, and the supernatural by playing with the layout and the font on the page of the novel. So one last one, forgery is a defining element of Gothic fiction. It goes back to the first Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto, published in 1764 by Horace Walpole. The Castle of Otranto claims to be a translation based on an Italian manuscript from the 16th century by William Marshall. In fact, it's not a translation, and it's not by William Marshall, but by Horace Walpole, who wrote it under a pseudonym. In doing so, Walpole launched a trend, and many Gothic novels afterwards are presented as found manuscripts. Today, the technique of the found manuscript translates as that of the found footage in many horror movies, for example. You've got a few examples here. One last trend is the French, in the French novel of the late 18th and early 19th century, is that of the veiled identity. So many novels published at the time are either anonymous or pseudonym. It enables writers to differentiate between different parts of their literary productions, the more serious on one side, and then a more frivolous or mercantile one on the other side. For women, it was also a way to preserve their reputation and identity, as it was still very much frowned upon for a woman to mingle with literature considered as a male domain. In any case, using a pseudonym or choosing to remain anonymous was a good form of publicity, arousing readers' and critics' curiosity, who would play a sort of detective game and speculate on the identity of the mysterious writer. So to conclude, with its capacity to constantly reinvent itself and to explore unconscious and political fears, the Gothic continue to arouse the same curiosity and the same pleasure. Identifying where our thirst for dark mysteries and secrets come from enables us to understand why we enjoy reading a Gothic novel or watching a horror movie. So after you get home this evening, if you ever get the chance to curl up on the sofa with the latest Gothic novel, ask yourself, why do we enjoy so much being scared, and why did we enjoy it so much over centuries? Thank you. If you have any questions, we can have a chat just outside the room.